This is the Carolina Catholic Homeschool Showcase. Now, here's your host, Elizabeth Hadi.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Catholic Homeschool series here on the Carolina Catholic Media Network. I'm your host, Elizabeth Hadi. This whole week, we are exploring homeschooling, especially in a classical way. And today, I have two lovely ladies joining me, Kerri Davison and Rosamond. And today, we are going to be talking all about why we homeschool, the challenges we face, the joys of homeschooling, and just delving into all of the beautiful details of our homeschooling journey. So Kerri and Kelly, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Now, Kerri, I would love it if you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit of your background, how long you've been homeschooling, the number of kids you have, that sort of thing.
My husband and I have been married for 34 years. We have 8 children, aged 14 to 29. We've been homeschooling for 24 years. And we have a business. We run Holy Heroes. And so all of our children have worked in that and through the years. And we've always homeschooled our children. And Kelly, you can introduce yourself.
Well, you're almost done there.
Yeah, I am.
A few more years left.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm a little behind you on that. We have 7 children. My husband, Chad, and I have 7. And the oldest is 21. And so he's starting graduate school in the fall. And then the next one is 19, and he's in college at Belmont Abbey. And then we have a special needs 16-year-old and a couple of girls, 13 and 9. And then 2 more little boys at the end, 5 and 2. So I've got one graduating college and another that I need to graduate diapers all in this year. So
right, that comes with its own challenges.
Yes. I'd rather do the diaper training than teach them to drive.
Well, right now I'm going through, the potty training. This is our 3rd day. So far, so good. Now, I would love to hear more about how you both started homeschooling, because I think it's always so interesting. I think we all, there certainly are similarities with why we homeschool, but it's always interesting to hear where a mother was when she kind of decided that this was the right choice for her. So Kelly, why don't you go ahead with that?
Okay. Well, it was definitely not something I'd ever heard of or planned on before I had children. I had just finished a master's in education to be a speech pathologist. And actually all of my work experience is on the medical side with that, not necessarily, aside from my rotation in college, not necessarily education based. But I was planning on being a career mom, working and having my kids and doing it all in that sense. And so I'm jumping ahead with the struggles of homeschooling with doing it all. But I guess that's something that's been a pattern in my life from the beginning, because I was going to do it all in that way. And a dear friend of mine, my best friend at the time, Angela, had a daughter who was 5 months older than my son, my oldest child. And I was looking at preschools, and she said, well, I'm going to homeschool. And I said, you're going to what? What is that? We were living in Athens, Georgia at the time. And she mentioned it. And then they ended up moving out to Salt Lake City. And the next year we ended up moving out to Salt Lake City in Utah. And she had ordered these little preschool books. I believe the publisher was Rod and Staff, but she got them through Seton Home Study and showed them to me. And I was like, well, we can do that too, and my oldest was 3 years old and I had a 1-year-old, and I went ahead and ordered him. And, those first kids, they're just ready to do everything and they have all the parents' attention. And so he jumped right in, and we were flying through the books. By the time he was old enough to go to kindergarten, he'd already finished through Seton 2nd grade. And I was like, now what? But that year, fortunately, I didn't end up sending him to kindergarten. God kind of intervened again. I had just finished up a fellowship in my field, and he sent us John Paul, which is my 3rd child. And he was the one born with hydrocephalus. And I think we probably spent half of that first year in the hospital. And there was no way I was sending a child to kindergarten under those circumstances. I could I was living at the hospital all the time. There was no way I was packing lunches and putting somebody on a bus or anything like that. And so we started hospital schooling, is what I called it. My kids would come to the hospital, and they spent all day with me, brought their books, and we just did it there. And the first few years of John Paul's life were just like that. And that's why we continued. And this was back in 2005, 2006, 2007, kind of early 2000s. The schools were not as obviously the public schools in dire circumstances the way we're hearing about today. So that was definitely not necessarily my motivation. It was just, I stumbled upon it almost on accident. The Lord was taking care of all of this and putting the right people in my path, and then the right circumstances in our family life to ensure that it happened. And in 2009, late 2009, we moved to Connecticut for 3 years. And it was living there that I just went ahead and threw my hands up and let my license expire. And I don't regret it now. It turned out all the medical side helped me greatly with my own child. But even thinking back to college classes a little bit and things that we studied, I'm going, homeschooling now. So today, the reasons I do it are entirely different than the reasons that I had when I started. But I'm happy that we are still plugging away almost 20 years later.
So what would you say then are the reasons now that you homeschool? So in the past, right, you did it a little bit just because you were thrown into it. And then it was to some extent, maybe sort of under duress in the sense that you had this child with special needs and you were in the hospital. And to some extent, I mean, I did not have that situation, but I also kind of did it because I felt like there were no other good options, right? And as with you, my reasons have changed so completely. But so what would you say the reasons are now?
Well, I mean, there's no way we would send a child to school now with the way things are going, the situation, politically, culturally, even education-wise. I've had some interesting experiences in recent years with children who have been pulled out of both public and private schools and come to me for homeschooling. And it's been eye-opening to see the difference in education across the board with other programs. So certainly one reason now is because the academic superiority of what you're able to accomplish with that kind of one-on-one tailored approach with each child is just unparalleled. And if you have special needs, there are special resources and you can learn to tap into those. But the main reason really is that I was blown away by all that I didn't know, and relearning things for the first time, history told from a Catholic perspective, relearning religion. We all, whatever our Catholic backgrounds are, whether we're converts or we grew up in the church or we entered the church later, formation went through, for Catholics, a rough era there for actually a number of decades, I think. And so it's almost a rediscovery, reversion through my children. I remember reading the Seton Kindergarten Catechism and being blown away at the fact that I was learning so much from a kindergarten book, right? And then we get to fourth grade math and I'm crying because I don't know how to do the word problems. And I'm like, I can't even teach fourth grade math. And I went back and I've learned all of this since then. I'm like, there's so much there, real phonics and real grammar. And all of this has just been very enjoyable to learn along with my kids. And then the Catholic culture, that's really the bottom line, is you get to create your own family culture, your own Catholic culture, and life gets to revolve around that in a way that would not be possible. And so I don't know how I would answer the question if like the perfect classical school opened up down the road from me and it was Catholic and had everything. I don't know. I don't know what I would do. Would I sign up to be a teacher and just go be a part of it? Would I send my kids finally because there was something? Or would I have to say, no, the culture in our home and in our family, I can't give that up. I really don't know how I'd answer that question. But
yes, I understand. I mean, definitely that's something I have loved so much about homeschooling. Just the Catholic culture, and then as you said, relearning all these things that maybe I learned them before, maybe I learned them differently, and I need to sort of relearn them the correct way. But that's been such a joy. I found that to be so fun to just be able to continue my education and delve into all these subjects that maybe I'd forgotten or that I can learn better than I did in the past. What about you, Kerri?
We started homeschooling a little, not really under duress as in Kelly's situation, but when my oldest was before she was 5, I was looking at kindergartens, and I had previously been involved in some local politics with the school district, and that put me on sort of high alert about what was going on in the district. And so then I went and looked at what they were going to be really reading aloud in the classroom, and we weren't even Catholic. We were on our way into the church at the time, and I saw these books that they were reading aloud, and actually it started back then. So that was 25 years ago.
Interesting.
And that was all there then. This was in Minnesota, and I just thought, I can't do this. I can't put her in there. And so I was in this situation where I didn't know what to do, and there were some people down the road who were also involved with this situation. We had overturned a local. We got a school district referendum failed because of us, and that had never happened in Minnesota history. Okay,
wow.
And so it was crazy because the attorney general immediately came after us. They were going after my law license. It was like crazy. And I saw this and I thought, good grief, this is shocking to me, this behavior. And then I saw what was going on in the schools, and I thought, I can't do this. And one of the families that was involved with us, they homeschooled, and they had evangelized us. Actually, they were a beautiful Christian family. And I just thought, well, I'm going to start looking into this. And I started looking into it, and it was so beautiful. And then I started meeting Catholics who did it. And my husband came into the church, we became Catholic, and I started meeting these Catholics with these, what I considered at the time, enormous families. Okay. And I was like, wow, they can do this. And I had this similar experience to Kelly. I was standing in a Catholic bookstore, and I was reading a St. Joseph catechism, and I was reading why did God make you? To know, love, and serve him, and I was reading this, and I was holding this in the bookstore, and I was like looking around saying, do you know the answer to all the questions you've been seeking are right here in this children's book? And I was just completely blown away by all of this beautiful material, and that all of these people had no idea existed. And this is all before the internet, of course. And it was amazing. So we started on this homeschooling, but part of it was that I really felt at the time I didn't have any place to go. I couldn't possibly send my daughter to those schools. And now, of course, it's totally different. We don't homeschool under duress at all. We homeschool because it's what we choose to do. And it's a beautiful lifestyle. I wouldn't change it because of the family, the family structure, everything is around our family. My children are very close to one another. It's just created an entire Catholic culture that's been beautiful for us. And, we started a business out of it, and we started working there just so we could do more in that way. And it's been a wonderful 24 years. Of course, there's ups and downs. And I don't want anyone, I'm looking at Kelly's bookshelves behind her. And I know that I have bookshelves behind me. And I'm kind of looking at this saying, I want to just emphasize this for anyone who's seeing this as well as listening to this. It's not as hard as people make it out to be. Okay, so someone may see Kelly's bookshelves there. You have to realize those bookshelves were acquired over 20 years. And it's not as hard as people seem to think it is. It's really not. It's a very, really straightforward thing almost. And quite honestly, you can I've had this experience. I'm sure you've both had this experience having children and homeschooling at the same time. You have a bad year, or you have maybe, a couple bad years. Okay. And then educationally, you don't get through anything you wanted to get through. Things don't seem to be working. Children are struggling. You know what? There's always next year. And I actually have found that whether my child started reading at 4 or whether my child started reading at 8, they've all done very well. So it's very adjustable. You can't worry about the small stuff. And I think I would encourage people not to look at the bookshelves and say, I just can't do that. There's just so much material back there, because it's not like that. It's when you start smallish. Especially if you're diving in with no help, like no one's around you helping you, go to a Catholic school, a homeschool, and buy the curriculum, or do what Elizabeth does and follow, like go to her co-op where she, organizes stuff for you. So to help people start and get on the road, and then you can decide what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and you can tailor it to your own family and the needs of your children and kind of your family culture of how that, some families have every family has their own culture, and every family develops in their children. It's a combination of what their children can do and what their family culture is. And it's very unique to the family.
Yeah, that's so true. And it takes time to develop that, right? And
Yes.
kind of to discern what that means for your family. And I think we're so lucky today because there are so many resources out there. I mean, sometimes that can be a little overwhelming too, because there are lots of great curriculums out there. And living in Charlotte, we just have a lot of local resources with different co-ops available and classes and activities for our kids. So I think we're very blessed that way. But it does mean you can ease into it. You can have a lot of support, whether that is kind of in the Charlotte community or if you're outside of that. There's still obviously a lot of support for homeschooling now in general, which can make it just easier for you. You're not doing it alone. There's lots of other good families out there that are homeschooling or choosing to homeschool. I think especially we have seen an increase since COVID, right, of people choosing to take their kids out of school, whether that's public school or Catholic school, and choosing to homeschool. And so there's lots of us out there. Okay, well, I'd love to talk more about the curriculums and sort of your educational philosophy, but first we do need to take a very short break. But we will be back shortly, so please stay tuned.
2022 is bringing many new and exciting changes to our Carolina Catholic Apostolate, built to communicate how to better learn, love, and live our Catholic faith. We begin with our name change to Carolina Catholic Media. This reflects the expanded scope of Carolina Catholic Radio to include the development of our podcast, streaming, social media, YouTube, and direct marketing platforms. 2022 is a very important year for the Catholic Church. As a result, Carolina Catholic Media will feature more local news, information, and conversation to reflect what's happening now and how it impacts our local Catholic community. Throughout the year, Carolina Catholic Media will showcase our Catholic schools and homeschools, the Charlotte Diocese 50th anniversary, and the 2-year worldwide synod process that begins on the diocesan level. We encourage you to get involved, join us, and catch the spirit. The Carolina Catholic Media Apostolate is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are 100% funded by you. Please consider a donation, monthly tithe, or business sponsorship to support our mission and vision to spread the truth of Jesus Christ and our Catholic faith across the Carolinas. Thank you for discerning a role in our apostolate. May God bless you abundantly.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Catholic Homeschool series here on the Carolina Catholic Media Network. I'm your host, Elizabeth Hadi, and I'm joined with Kerri Davison and Kelly Rosamond. And we are talking all about our reasons for homeschooling, our journey. And right now, I would like to discuss our educational philosophies, the curriculums we choose. So Kelly, I mean, I know talking about educational philosophy, that's kind of a big topic. But if you just want to talk about maybe your what you think is the most important aspects of homeschooling and some of the curriculum choices you've made based on that.
Golly, I think we've done just about everything except straight up what they call unschooling over the years. Let's see. We started out with Seton, which is great. A lot of times if someone's overwhelmed or they're just getting started, it's so nice. It just comes in a little box with your rosary on top and you take it out and go through the checklist, work, done, So that was a good way to start for me. And then what did I read? The Well-Trained Mind, the Well-Educated Mind. And that was the beginning of me starting to contemplate classical education, which I know you're doing other talks on that, but I could go on and on about what that means to me specifically. And that has evolved a little bit as well. But I would say it's important, in my opinion, that's a tried and true method. It's been around for a really long time, the classical liberal arts. We just had a medieval history this past year with the kids, and
So much fun.
it kept coming up, but even in the 500s and Boethius and what are the 7 liberal arts and what are they for and what are they leading us to? And then you cover scholasticism and how it's all meant to get you ready for the highest ones, which is the study, of course, of philosophy and theology. And so I do think that they sort of hold pride of place in education, the liberal arts. That said, in the 500s, they didn't have as much major world history that they needed to study. And I think that alongside of that, really the humanities also are very important. And I particularly like the sort of format of choosing a historical time period and having everything revolve around that. Because the arts, the great works of literature written at that time that came, after the establishment of these liberal arts millennia ago, those great works of literature, the art, the music, the architecture, everything is informed by and informing the events of history and affecting each other. And I think that they need to be studied in that relational way, sort of like an immersion, at the same time not neglecting those core liberal arts subjects as age appropriate. They're tiered, and you have to master one before you can move on to the next, the actual subjects. But that's kind of my main focus with what I try to do with the kids in terms of bringing it all together. I don't worry too much about a lot of the STEM stuff right now. I think there's time for that later in high school and even in college to catch up on those things if you really do have an interest in that kind of area. Research and learning, science and technology, all of that. I really like the idea of focusing more on general principles and wonder when they're younger. Just cultivating that love of learning, giving them those gifts, those tools, truth, beauty, goodness, virtue, all of that. I think one of the things too that's become more important to me as I've gotten older and grown in my faith is helping to give them the tools to be able to really cultivate their own relationship with the Lord, their own prayer life, all of that. Like, I think with my oldest, I was very didactic and kind of, because the information was new to me. I was excited about it. And, so here you are, and here's my fire hose. I'm just gonna, but there's another side to that too. It's not just our intellect that God wants, it's our hearts. And so making sure that there's a place for the heart to grow in its love of wisdom and goodness in the formation and education of the child. So.
Yeah, there's so much that's beautiful in what you said. I mean, two things that I wanted to mention. One, the idea of integration, right, which is, I think, so important as well, where we see the connection between all these subjects, right? And you're picking a particular time period and then picking literature based on that and the art based on that. It's so beautiful to see all those connections and to see how they impact each other. And also the idea of how important it is to cultivate that love of what is good. And that is very classical, right? That goes back to Aristotle and Plato, right? And this idea of a very educated person being one who has a love of the good and the true and the beautiful. And that is not something, that's something that can be trained out of a person, right? If they're not educated properly, if they're not given beautiful books and profound books that unfortunately then they don't grow in the right way. Kerri, what about you? Would you say, I mean, what programs have you used, and what would you say your educational philosophy is?
I'm very similar to Kelly in many ways. We've used just about everything. I think a good place, I'm going to be a little more pragmatic here, because I think that everything in the Catholic world is amazing. You have just amazing resources. And really, my educational philosophy has been everything that's good and true and beautiful, and then classical as well, like in the way you approach it. But what I found was really helpful when, especially having a bunch of little kids, and Kelly was sort of getting at this, is that practically speaking, what does that look like? And I think sometimes you have to mix a few things in there, especially when they're little. High school becomes a little different. You can segment out, okay, we have to have a math, we have to have this, we have to have that, on the transcript. But when they're little, reading tons of great books, I would say good books, of course, great books as they get older, and, interest in wonder and beauty and history, and even philosophy about, the time periods you're doing, are all, that's perfect, really. And I do agree with the STEM. I know Kelly's older son is a STEM guy. I have some STEM kids as well. It's really not that necessary to start them young. It's really not. And anyone who's stressed about that, don't be, okay? Because if you teach your child to think and read well, and they do their math, they will be absolutely fine come, high school and college. It will come together. And I think it's also wise to say, if you don't know where to start, just go to a Catholic curriculum seller, Seton, Colby, Mother Divine Grace. There's a lot of them. Go to a co-op like Elizabeth's and figure out a place to start. And then you can, you're not locked into any of these things. You can mix them too. So you have a bad year. So hey, we need some workbooks in there. Let's throw a few workbooks in there to fill the gap. Oh, look at this. Here's a math workbook. Here's a handwriting workbook. Put some workbooks in there and then build around those. So I actually had a very interesting friend. They had 11 children, and she had terrible pregnancies. So what she actually did on the years when she literally couldn't get off the couch, she made work packs. And she used to take the Seton workbooks and other things, and she spent like a month doing this for her children at various age levels, and she'd rip the pages out for the day, and she would each kid would get a work pack of their math sheet, their penmanship sheet, their religion sheet, and she would and they would do this, and she'd have them in files, and they would go take their work pack, they would work it through. She would lay on the couch, and they come to her with questions, and then she would read them books. And when they were done, go play outside. And she lived like that for years. And it was amazing. And I'm like, wow, really? And I'll tell you something, her kids are something else. And it had, they're intelligent, they're well educated, they're formed in their faith. And so I'm just saying, even under the worst circumstances, this can work.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think if you have that, especially if you have that foundation of good books, right, that it sounds like she had, that's so crucial, right? If they are getting that rich feast through the books they're reading, that Charlotte Mason talks about, then that can cover so much, right?
Well, also, it's not just what they're reading, it's what you're reading to them, because you can read all these books to them before they can even read. Yes. So it's in some ways, frankly, being on the couch is a benefit, because you could just sit there and read books out loud. And so that's something that's been a huge part of our education, as well as and in fact, that's why we started making glory stories, and that's the reason audiobooks are a great thing, because I do believe that harnessing the imagination of children in the books they read, in the books you read to them, in the audio. It is so much more powerful to get into these things into their imagination than video. So video takes away their imagination because they don't have to imagine anything. It's all done for them.
It's passive.
It's right. And so the audio or the reading to them, it is a very powerful tool that is very underused in our modern world.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, and I'm actually having an episode later this week that's devoted to the whole idea of moral imagination and developing it and how important that is, and using literature to do it, and how that is one of the primary ways that children do develop that moral imagination and that understanding of what is good and that desire to seek what is good that can be formed so powerfully through stories. And I think to your point also about being able to read to them and read them things that they are not capable of reading on their own. I definitely discovered that with my own children. I have my two oldest boys really struggle learning to read. But, they listen to audiobooks all the time, and I read a massive amount to them as well. And so their reading comprehension was fabulous, and their vocabulary was good, and they were exposed to all these rich ideas, and we could discuss them then, as opposed to a child that's just reading these things on their own. And if they don't understand it, they just usually move on. And if they don't know that word, maybe they'll pick it up from the context, but maybe they'll just keep reading and not think about it. So I think there's so much good in not just reading books, but you're right, reading aloud to them and then being able to have those conversations after that. That makes it so beautiful. So we actually are almost out of time here. I know the time has gone by very quickly, but I'm hoping to get just a few more quick questions in before we end. So we've talked a lot about the beauties and joys of homeschooling, I think. Now, I would also like to hear kind of maybe what has been most challenging for you. I don't want to end with that, but I do think it's important to kind of acknowledge that, what are the things we've struggled with, and then maybe even how we've been able to overcome that or deal with it. So Kelly, would you go ahead with that?
Sure. I alluded to that earlier. There's so much that we want to give our kids and so much that we want to do that my biggest challenge is obviously that you can't do it all, and so narrowing things down, choosing what's more important, choosing what to focus on, choosing which books to get through, to finish, to read. It's how much can I fit on my plate at the feast? You know what I mean? And so that's definitely one of my challenges. Another one is that I am, I don't know, you might even call it like a passion or a hobby, but I'm a planner. And so homeschooling tends to get in my head and occupy like almost all of my mental space. And so it can be a distraction from the other things that are really important, like being present at mass or to your children. And you're like, mom, like, I'm sorry, I was just thinking about this book or this math program, or fill in the blank, right? And it becomes just the thing that is sort of always there. Or if you can't sleep at night, it's like that kind of thing. So those in a way are beautiful challenges, because it's just the too much of a good thing, if there can be such a thing as that. So
yes, and right, and that homeschooling can be very all-consuming, right? Now, Kerri, what about you?
Aside from like keeping order and keeping kids on task, just the mundane stuff that comes with homeschooling, I think the really hard thing is to always remember is that you're really forming a person that has to go out into the world. Like, they're not going to stay here. They're going to go somewhere else. And I have to always keep that in my head, that, what I'm doing now they're not going to stay here. They have to be able to go in the world. And so I have to always remind myself. So, and I think this is good for all parents to think about. So when bad things happen, okay, this is a learning opportunity. Okay, so when a child can't do something, okay, this is an opportunity to overcome difficulty. When they're exposed to something terrible, say from swim team or from, something, you have to, you have to embrace it and say, okay, now we're going to learn from this and we're going to discuss this. And that's what I think is something that, you can't, there's no way you can insulate your kids from everything. And there's no way you can take out of them all of their own weaknesses. Okay. You can't educate that out of them. you have to learn to work with that, and you need to kind of embrace it and say, okay, we're gonna do something here so that you can actually finish your work, or you just learned something that was really contrary to our faith, so we're going to discuss it, as horrendously uncomfortable as that is for all of us here, but we do it. And so that for me is a harder part, but that's like life as a parent as well. That's not just, but because my kids are here all the time, we're the only ones doing this. They're not, as a friend of mine said, this is kind of a funny thing. She's like, gosh, she said, she was so funny. Why couldn't they just learn on the streets like we did? And so,
back in the day.
Yeah. She's like, why? She goes, they come and you think about it, and you're like, you're right. I would never have asked my parents these questions when they would come up, but my kids come home or they come across something in a book that suggests something, and they come to me with the questions, and you have to embrace it, and you have to address it and answer it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that is one of the valuable things about homeschooling, right? Is that we have the potential to be so much more connected to our children, right? And for them to come to us, whereas in the past that might not have been the case, depending on what your culture was like around you. And I think nowadays, right, we need that more and more, and our kids need that more and more to stay connected with us. So that's really beautiful. All right. Well, thank you so much both for joining me, Kerri and Kelly. It was a delight talking to you, and you guys have been homeschooling for a long time with a lot of wisdom to share. I'm not quite at that point yet. I mean, I was just thinking about the fact, Kerri, that my oldest is 14, and I think your youngest is 14. So.
Yes.
But my homeschooling journey too, it's been so beautiful, and I've been so grateful that God kind of forced me into it, and that I've learned so much along the way, and will hopefully continue to learn in all of the years ahead of me. So once again, thank you so much for joining me on the Carolina Catholic Media Network.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
And hopefully for our listeners, please stay tuned the rest of the week. We're going to continue exploring homeschooling, especially homeschooling in a classical way.